Greetings. It's Monday, June the 16th, 2025. I'm Thomas Caldwell of the Aurelian Column, and this is the Monday Morning Report. Iran and Israel at war. So many lies and so much deception over so much by so many. I'm going to go into some of the background here because details are changing by the hour. They're coming from different directions. You don't really know what to believe or not believe. Nobody really knows exactly what's going on except the major players, and they're not telling, no matter what anybody is saying about deep sources. At times like this, the mainstream media is not really reporting what they're finding out. They're reporting what they're being told to report by what are called deep sources. In reality are just officials that they aren't formally naming. So let's go into a little bit of how we got to where we're at and where it's probably going to go. First off, fact, Iran did not have nuclear weapons, and the current government did not want them. That's by their own admission. They didn't want nuclear weapons, but Iran did want to become a threshold state, meaning they could arm themselves with nuclear weapons if they were needed, but would not do so unless there was no other way. Japan, by the way, is also a threshold state. Arguably, Taiwan could be, South Korea, but nobody's bombing them. Even though Japan could make a nuclear weapon in an afternoon, probably by using a screwdriver. No, there's a lot more going on here. And this is where we have to be brutally honest. It appeared that Iran was sincere in agreeing to a deal with the United States that would have worked and prevented this war had they been able to go ahead and meet with American negotiators this past Sunday. But we know that didn't happen, did it? Mr. Netanyahu saw to that, and here we are. Now, as I've already explained earlier, by partaking in this deception where you agree to negotiate while you're preparing to strike someone has put the United States in a very bad position, possibly for the duration of the Republic, because we now have a precedent where the U.S. government, the executive branch, the president, will be deceiving to somebody they ostensibly wanted to have peace talks with. It certainly will destroy the credibility of Donald Trump in negotiating with anyone else in the future. So if there's going to be talks between China and Taiwan to avert something, the Americans are not going to have anywhere near as much credibility as we did just a week ago. Think about that. But that doesn't matter at this point. There's going to be plenty of time to go back in history and say what could have been done. Nobody's saying wants a war, and nobody's saying needs a war, but here we are. There's plenty of blame to go around, but as I've said, none of that matters at the moment. This is quickly becoming a war of civilizations, or how civilization will proceed and survive on this little planet of ours. So let's look at where things are this morning and where they will probably go and what the desired outcome for the United States and the civilized world should be or could be. The greatest problem we've seen in the past half century has been the rise of Islamic fundamentalism, the rise of a fanatical viewpoint of a major world religion. And we can blame that on the late Jimmy Carter, cursed be his name, when he abandoned Iran in 1979 and let the crazies take over. It led to all the mayhem we have seen since then, including 9/11. We'll get into that a little bit later. But again, we can go back and say what should have been done, but here we are. We've had nearly half a century of Islamic craziness on this planet. Everybody and their brother and pet dog knows the term Allah Akbar, and if they hear that in a crowded place, they're going to run for their lives. It has to end. Like it or not, the Israelis have set off what could well be referred to in future history books as the Third World War, if there are any future history books. So it doesn't matter at this point how this all could have been avoided. The fact is the fight has begun. And where it goes and how it ends is something that is still a big unknown. The longer the missiles fly and both countries are inflicting damage on each other, the greater the chance is of the United States joining in on the side of Israel and starting to bomb Iran. Time is not on the side of the Israelis, and they know that very well. The country is about the size of New Jersey. Can you imagine that little state being hit by hundreds of ballistic missiles with powerful conventional warheads? Now, these are blockbuster-sized explosions. These are what leveled London and Berlin during World War II. Blast waves will kill people 1,000 feet or more from where the missiles land. This is serious stuff. This is heavy munitions. It's not just one building or two going down. And the Iranians, by all accounts, have a lot of these things. And they've only been using up their older models so they can get on to the newer ones. So it's only a matter of time before the U.S. joins in, because they are not going to sit idly by and watch Israel get obliterated. The Israeli government and its agents in the United States have far too much influence over our political establishment. The Israeli Jewish lobby in the U.S. has enormous power and reach. So the U.S. is going to get involved unless this thing stops very soon, and it does not look like it's going to do so. In terms of what's happening as of now, the city of Haifa, which is a seaside location in the northern part of Israel, that's been hit pretty hard. Its power plant has been obliterated. Most of the city is without power. Civilian targets are being hit by Iranian missiles, whether intentionally or because they're not that accurate is not known, nor is it really relevant. The Israelis initially were able to knock out air defenses in Iran, supposedly with a cyber attack. Remember, I've been talking about cyber warfare? Well, it's very real. But apparently the Iranians have been able to recover from that, and they're able to shoot down certain types of aircraft. Reports that Iranians have shot down Israeli aircraft are hard to confirm. The Israelis are not going to confirm it. Again, the first casualty in war is the truth, and we aren't really sure what's happening. All we're sure about is both sides are hitting each other pretty hard. Now, what else can happen? Well, the Straits of Hormuz, you keep hearing about that. That separates the Arabian Sea from the Persian Gulf, or the Arabian Gulf, depending on which government is naming it. That is only 20.5 miles wide. That is tiny. And through that little bit of waterway flows about 20% of the world's petroleum. Does that sound like a problem? Yeah. By the way, 20 miles is about the distance of a World War II naval gun. You know those battleships the Americans had at the end of the war, the ones with the big 16-inch guns? Those things could fly more than 20 miles. So if you had two old World War II battleships from nearly 100 years ago on either side of the Straits of Hormuz, well, you'd be able to stop anything real easily back then. Imagine how effective modern torpedoes or missiles would be. No, you could shut that off in a heartbeat, and the Iranians are more than capable of doing so, and they're threatening to do so. That will spin the world economy into a very bad place. So even though bombs will not be dropping on American cities, gas prices will be shooting up faster than a hypersonic missile coming out of Iran. And this is going to cause all sorts of mayhem here. Unless it stops immediately, it's going to head that way. So look for everything to shoot up in value in the United States. Inflation will be shooting up in spite of Mr. Trump's promises for oil to be cheaper and food to go down. Well, that won't happen, thanks to this mess that we are now getting into. There are reports of American military assets converging in that part of the world, another aircraft carrier battle group coming out of the Pacific. There have been reports from some sources that American aircraft, especially refueling planes, have departed the United States and flown out across the Atlantic. For some reason, I doubt they're on their way to Italy or Greece for a summer vacation. One of the things you got to remember, and I keep talking about, is when you enter a war, nothing ever goes as planned. Many people are comparing the Israeli-American attack on Iran to Japan's attack on Pearl Harbor back in 1941. Yet few people, especially Americans, seem to realize that attack was a failure as far as the Japanese were concerned. It did not go as planned. A lot of Americans think, oh, yes, they crippled our fleet. Not really. They didn't. The main target of the Japanese attack force, headed up by Admiral Nagumo and planned out by the historically famous Admiral Yamamoto, the target they were after and could not afford to miss were the 3 American aircraft carriers based at Pearl Harbor. They were the primary target. And because they were not there, things went very differently in the Japanese war plans. There was also no third attack wave on Pearl Harbor. As a result, the target of that third attack, which didn't happen, was to wipe out Hawaii's petroleum supply, Oahu's power stations, and the American Pacific submarine fleet. When the commander of the Japanese strike force was informed that the 3 American aircraft carriers, their primary reason for that attack, were not at Pearl Harbor, he immediately, went into a bit of a panic, recalled his planes, and retreated. As a result, the next day, the ships that were not damaged in the Japanese attack, including the submarines, had plenty of fuel and headed out to sea to begin hunting Japanese ships. There was also plenty of electricity to begin repairing what was repairable, and the 3 American aircraft carriers came back to Pearl Harbor, got refueled, got reprovisioned, headed into the Pacific, and the rest is history. History that did not go well for the Japanese who attacked. We could be seeing something similar unfold before our eyes. Like the Japanese of 84 years ago, the Israelis have started something they will not be able to finish without help from elsewhere. And that means the United States has to come to the rescue. In spite of what you're seeing, the Iranian exiles, which you find all over the world, especially in the United States, are really happy to see what's going on. They've been waiting for something like this for half a century. You see, this is not about Iran getting nuclear weapons. That was the excuse. Iran has been accused of trying to come up with nuclear weapons for decades. Every few years you hear about Iran will soon have a nuclear weapon. Iran will soon have a nuclear weapon. Iran will soon have a nuclear weapon. You keep hearing that. You've been hearing it since the end of the 20th century, and it's never happened. This is not about stopping Iran's nuclear program, although it seems to have been stopped anyways. It's about overthrowing the Islamic Republic of Iran and changing the regime. Regime change. One of the oldest American customs when it comes to geopolitics, and one that usually doesn't go the way you want it to. And this is what the big question mark is. You hear stories about the Crown Prince, the son of the late Shah, being ready to go to Iran. But then there are many political analysts who are pointing out that he has no real support there. You don't really know. Again, one thing that all wars have in common: they all begin with certainty. Then they enter the realm of the unknown, and then they end up where few people could have predicted. This is not going to be a quick and easy fight, as few wars ever are. The longer it lasts, the greater the chance it could light the whole world into a bonfire of death and destruction. But if you want an outcome that would be ideal, it would be for the Islamic Republic of Iran to fall. It would have been better if people were able to find a peaceful way out of this, and then over time, maybe subvert it, and eventually it would go away. But the world is tired of crazy religious fanaticism. People have been comparing this to maybe making the Cold War happen. You know, the Russians and Americans always came up with nuclear agreements and things like that. Excuse me, at the time they were the Soviets, but the same principle, same thing with the Chinese. But these were countries that were operating on the principle of survival. Even North Korea thinks like that. Islamic fundamentalism, they don't care about the world. They want to die and go to their version of heaven. They don't see a problem with that. These are people that put religion before reality. This does not say religion doesn't have a place in human life or human existence or is important. It is very important. It's a moral guide. It's a spiritual way. But when it comes to destroying people or killing them because they don't believe in your version of it and you think everybody on the planet has to think like you, and that's the way Islamic fundamentalists believe. They believe everyone on the planet has to be a Muslim or get their head cut off. And every time Iran has been given a break, it has utilized it to spread more of its mayhem. They didn't care one bit about the Palestinians. They never did. They were an excuse to go after Israel. And why did they go after Israel? Well, because tyrants need enemies to unite their people. The Islamic Republic of Iran is a horrible, horrible, horrible thing. And one thing we can hope for now that the fight is on, that it will be overthrown, however unlikely that probably is. There's a lot of reports about them losing or whatever. No. If killing all the members of their armed forces in command has had an effect, it's not big because someone's still launching missiles. And I doubt it's just a bunch of enlisted men deciding to do it on their own. No, they have a command structure that has redundancy in it. They're not stupid, and they are very organized. They've had half a century almost to be that organized. So this is a fight. It's most likely going to last a lot longer. And if you have to pick a winner, you want to pick the Israelis in this one, or I should say the Israeli Americans, because the Americans are helping the Israelis. Whatever you want to hear otherwise. The big mistake that would be made, if they really want regime change, and I'm sure they do, is to put boots on the ground in Iran. Once you do that, you've lost all credibility, and you have a country that is going to unite against whoever is in charge and fight back what will be perceived as invaders. No matter how much people hated the administration of Joe Biden or thought that the man should be put in prison or tried for treason and done away with, if another country had attacked the United States, do you really think that people would sit by and say, oh, great, please come here? No. People don't think that way. Humans don't act that way. If the Israelis and Americans put one single soldier on their territory, it is not going to go well. It's not going to go well anyways, but it would really go bad. So watch this carefully, but the United States will be in on this. If this is not over in a few days, they will be there within a week. In the air and on the ocean, and hopefully, not on the ground. Meanwhile, back to the home front. The No Kings events that were lauded, they're going to be a big thing over the weekend on Saturday. Well, that seems to have gone the only way it could have ended up, a waste of time and a lot of money. I've heard enormous amounts were spent on that could have easily been used to help people, but no. That's what you get with leftist billionaires that think they know better than the rest of us. There were some fairly large crowds that did end up here and there. No talk as to how much they cost to be rented. There was some violence here and there. There were some people that ended up using their cars to go after people blocking the roads. But if you saw what was announced in Florida, where police officers were saying, if you do anything violent, we're going to shoot and kill you, I think that did convince a bunch of these limousine liberal types to stay at home and cheer from their couches. You see, this is what the leftist Marxist establishment is all about, nonsense and stupidity. They want to see change, but they don't want it to come about from consensus. Most people in the United States do not believe in the insanity that's been forced down our throats for the last several decades. That's why the leftists in this country have had to resort to election fraud, intimidation, things like Antifa, riots, burning cities, all that fun stuff. They're not going to get what they want peacefully or through rational argument, so they have to use violence. Now, speaking of violence, in Minnesota, there was the assassination of a liberal lawmaker who recently sided with Republicans on a law aimed at not helping out illegal immigrants. This tragic event is being played up by the establishment media as an example of what they're calling MAGA madness or violence. That's not necessarily the case. As of a couple of hours ago, the perpetrator has been caught, or the suspect, we would say, since he has not yet been found guilty in a court of law. But his true motivations are still open to what people are saying. Now, it appears, of course, it was a politically motivated assassination. But why? And what does he really believe? Some places it appears to be he was a supporter of Donald Trump, except that's not coming from him. That's coming from people who claim to have known him. He had a bunch of No Kings literature in his car, and he was lauded by Tim Kaine, was appointed to a commission in Minnesota overseeing something or other. And as of this morning, all of the social media posts lauding this guy on the part of Governor Tim Kaine. You remember him, Tampon Tim, the guy that was running for vice president recently? All of his posts praising this guy have been erased from social media. Problem is, this internet doesn't forget, and people have retained copies of them. So there's apparently some sort of cover-up here, and the smart money is that this woman was targeted because she sided with Republicans in a vote that was very crucial to the liberal Marxist establishment. We don't really know yet. The guy has been arrested, thank goodness. He's going to be interrogated. The story will come out. But again, there are many lies flying around this country right now. And they're coming from the side that wants to destroy this country right now. So be very careful where you get your information from and be critical about it as much as you can be. Over the weekend, I was in Washington, D.C. That's why there weren't any reports on Friday, Saturday, or Sunday, because I was down gathering facts, those things that are very inconvenient when people are throwing around lies. But I went down and I spent the weekend in the nation's capital, and I got to see the parade through the city of Washington, D.C., soldiers and tanks and other vehicles. Fortunately, none of them fell into any subway tunnels on account of weight, much to the relief of anyone who uses the D.C. Metro to get around. No word on how much damage was actually done to the streets, but, well, Washington being what it is, I'm sure they're going to find some way to raise the level of graft and corruption to new heights. I've been to better birthday parties, and let me tell you what this really was. This was a Trump rally with tanks. Just like any other Trump rally, if you've ever been to one, there were too few trucks that were able to serve food. Again, you couldn't bring any food or water in with you because, your apple or orange could have been filled with plastic explosive or something. But they did give away free water. The U.S. Army was there and gave away plenty of water. I mean, you had no problem drinking water, and that makes sense because you'd rather people hydrate themselves than be hauled away by ambulances when they're not smart enough to drink enough in the heat. But there were very few food trucks. I've noticed that about all the Trump rallies. There are very few food trucks, and people had to wait in line for hours. I was in line with the people I was with for, 2 hours? Really, 2 hours, and we were some of the first people in there. It was not very well organized. We could do better. Anyways, it was interesting to see, but it was one big recruiting drive. You saw so many Army recruiters around, and you can tell because on their left shoulder it says recruiter. It was one big ad for joining the U.S. Army, making a career out of it, serving with pride, a long tradition, so you can drive one of these cool tanks that are rolling down Constitution Avenue. It was interesting, but it was a little bit telling. Now, one of the myths that's out there that you've been seeing, and people are saying that Donald Trump screwed up and he cursed the U.S. Army, and that is something that I did some real research on. Traditionally, a military would walk down or march down a thoroughfare and would salute to the right. In other words, the head of state, the commander, what have you, be at a location on the right where you'd have a bunch of bleachers and guests and things like that, and you'd say, eyes right, salute, and roll on by in your tanks and with your rifles as you're marching and all that other fun stuff. Well, guess what? Donald Trump was on the left. And the soldiers were coming down from the left. And they had to salute to the left. And people were all aghast. Oh, no, that's never happened. Yes, it happens all the time. Every bit of film footage I could find on inauguration parades back to John F. Kennedy showed troops and soldiers and floats and other bands and everything coming down Pennsylvania Avenue from the Capitol, the eastern side of the city to the west, and saluting the new president to the left. That also happened back in 1991 when there was a victory parade over the first Gulf War. They had tanks and armored personnel carriers back then rolling down the street. So this happens all the time. Whether it is part of formal military protocol or not, there is a time when the U.S. military will march down a street, Pennsylvania Avenue, in front of the White House with a president who's just been sworn in and salute him to the left. So enough of that nonsense about the U.S. Army now being cursed that because of some gaffe, Donald Trump didn't salute them properly. Someone just mentioned to me when I was talking about this over the last couple of days, the first rule in beating a curse is to believe it isn't real, and this certainly isn't real. It was a lot of fun, to be honest, even though you did have to wait in line too long for some overpriced food. Much of it with a Middle Eastern flavor, by the way, but that's the nature of DC food trucks. In closing, I'd like to point out the death of someone at the hands of other religious fanatics in the Middle East, namely the Saudi Arabians. Yes, they are religious fanatics. And that is the execution by beheading of a man named Turki al-Jasir. He had his head cut off for treason after suffering in a Saudi Arabian prison for 7 years. And if you know anything about how the Saudi Arabians treat their prisoners, I'm sure it was an exercise in torture and suffering that, well, the Saudi government and its American ally would rather you not know about. The late Mr. al-Jasir did a lot of blogging back in the day about corruption pertaining to the Saudi royal family. Lots of posts made on Twitter and elsewhere about the realities of the family that rules that nation with an iron fist. Remember, the Saudi is a family. Saudi Arabia is a family-run enterprise. Frankly, though, Saudi corruption, that's really not news, so was he really reporting news? That's another matter. Saudi Arabia is a friend of convenience for the United States. They have oil. And with that oil money, they have financed all sorts of mayhem of their own, and the United States has turned a blind eye to it. And in spite of the fact that 9/11 happened at the hands of mostly Saudi citizens and money that came from someplace, they've continued to be a friend of convenience all this time. And friends of convenience are just that, friends of convenience, which means if things go the right way, they're not going to be around very long, just like that old joke about Tonto and the Lone Ranger. They're surrounded by Indians, and Tonto says to the Lone Ranger, "What do you mean, we, paleface?" That's what you're looking at right here. Did you know that the Saudi ambassador had dinner at the White House with President George W. Bush as the smoke was still rising from the ruins of the Pentagon? At another time in history, that fanatical country would have been pulverized into dust not too long after the Twin Towers fell. But things are not as simple as they used to be when it comes to global politics and going after enemies, either foreign or domestic. Not everybody in the Arabian Peninsula or everybody who's a citizen of that country is an enemy of the United States, nor are they bad people. I've had a chance to meet many over the years. That's the thing about people. Most of them in this world are not bad. They just want to get along and move along and live their lives as they see fit. Not everybody in the world is going to want to have a democracy like Europe or a republic like the United States or have a monarchy like Saudi Arabia. The fact is that fanaticism of any kind, always heads into a bad place. And religious fanaticism is the worst thing that the human race has come up with next to nuclear weapons or artificial intelligence. Religious fanaticism is a bane upon humanity. We are looking into the maw of an abyss of a third world war that would involve China. Oh, imagine how they're going to be if most of their oil gets cut off. Or Russia, or countries in the Middle East, some of which have nuclear weapons, namely Pakistan, or Turkey, which has a major military. And this is done because of religion. Do you think if the Israelis were all Muslims, we'd have any of these problems? Nope, we wouldn't. So while you watch this unfold, just remember what it's all about. It's not about anything rational. It's not about anything worldly. It's about different interpretations as to who rules the universe, who created mankind, and who's right and wrong about it. In reality, all words are sacred, as they would say, and all prophets have something good to say about something, whether they be religious or business or economic or political. That's the old principle of the yin and yang, if you want to check into that. Right now, what the world needs is morality. Morality that goes beyond religion and goes beyond politics. Morality that's about humanity and survival. The next week, the next few hours, is going to determine the course of human events and possibly the course of human survival. And the sad thing is that there's little any of us at the bottom of the pyramid can do about it, except watch and wait and pray to some divine power that has a lot more intelligence than the ones the people starting this war seem to be praying to. That's it for today. If you appreciate my work, please like, subscribe, and share. Share with your friends and share with your enemies, no matter what they believe. We need as many humans involved in this as we possibly can get. If you also like my work, please consider a paid subscription or a donation. It's needed to keep the lights on while there's still electricity, both literally and figuratively. I can be reached at feedback@aureliancolumn.com. That's feedback@aureliancolumn.com. I'm up on X. My handle there is MICCAMPEN. That's MICCAMPEN. This podcast originates at Substack. My handle there is aureliancolumn.substack.com. Until we meet again, be good, be safe, be vigilant, and remember, clown world, the deep state, and all religious fanaticism must be destroyed. Good day.